Welcome to the 154th meeting of Boston VR. Thanks to Jonathan and Mark Lee and the iLearn campus for hosting us, letting us be part of this excellent conference. And tonight, Karen Alexander will speak on, the virtual bodies and the future of XR, and then we'll have Q&A. That'll go to 9:30, but Karen, it's the hour is your oyster. Use it as you see fit.
Okay. Yes.
Right. I mean, I expect a good bit of Q&A. Then at 9:30. Sanjit Singh, a student at, oh my God. Rutgers, thank you. I knew it was, right, I knew you had a connection with him there. Sanjit Singh from Rutgers is going to talk about using AR for astronaut guidance on the moon and Mars and beyond. Be very interesting. That talk will be in the Zoom only. So I'll post the link when he starts to do that. Before Karen starts, any questions about Boston VR or what we're doing? And welcome everyone. And here, I'm going to post the Boston VR meetup. Let's see, bostonvrmeetup.com. Excuse me. I'm getting this link. Here it is. All right, I'm posting it on the public link. And I'm going to post the recording to the event page for tonight's event. And I'm also going to give the recording to Heather so they can make it, and add it to the recordings for the rest of the conference. So without further ado, our star for the evening, please welcome Karen.
Great. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for inviting me to give this talk to the Boston VR community. I'm delighted to meet everyone there involved and to hopefully engage with them after I give this presentation. And I'm especially happy that this is taking place during the iLearn 2021 conference. I am heavily involved with iLearn. I was one of the expert panelists for the State of XR and Immersive Learning report that was just launched yesterday after a lot of work by a lot of people. My part ended a long time ago, but I'm still proud of having played a small role in that. And I encourage you all to check that out. It is available on the iLearn website. I am also a member of the organizing committee for the iLearn 2021 conference. I am the opportunity and inclusion chair, and we've all been working very hard for months on this conference to bring it together, to bring it to you all. And I am one of the founders and the leaders of XR Women, which is now an initiative of iLearn and an organization that I'm really pleased to be part of. I see a couple of our members are here, Wendy Sherman and Caroline Dennis. Thank you so much for joining us. And yes, you're all welcome to join us. We welcome women and allies every Wednesday on the iLearn campus, 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. So I'll let you do the translation of the time zones. And just a little bit about me. So I have a professional background in higher education. And my academic background is in English, so I'm not coming from a tech background at all. But I got involved in XR around 2016. I dove in headfirst and haven't looked back. So I'm going to start with a personal anecdote, and this has to do with when my daughter was first going to school, and I was researching a school to send her to. This was in Louisville, Kentucky, and the picture, though, is from Arkansas in 1956. This is not a picture from that time, but I was visiting schools and to try to find out where I wanted to send her. And as I went to this one school that had both traditional and Montessori programs, I walked down a hallway with my guide and looked into a classroom on one side, and I saw the teacher standing at the front of the room by her desk or at the chalkboard, and the kids were all in desks. And they were slumping, they were holding their heads up with their hands, like you see the boy in the middle of the picture on the slide there doing. They would just look completely bored and totally disengaged. And it just did not look like a good situation, or one for which a lot of learning could take place. And then we went across the hall and to the Montessori classroom, and we saw there something like this. There were children on the floor working. They were working on things that were pinned on the wall. They were at tables. Some of them were working individually. Some were working in groups. But there was a clear sense of activity and positivity, and the kids were all doing something, and it really seemed like there was learning taking place. So of course I chose the Montessori program to put my daughter into, and was very glad that I did. And I think that it had an effect on her. As she got older, I never had to tell her to do her homework. She did it herself. She was used to doing her work plan. She would get a work plan in Montessori education and have to do that every week. And so she had learned to be self-directed, which was really fantastic. So, and at that point, obviously there was a choice in what schools she could attend. And that was why I was doing this research and searching around. Louisville had had court-ordered desegregation starting in the 1970s, and I was part of the school system when that was going on. And I have to say that the inequities it was meant to solve were not solved, and you know, probably continue to this day. When my daughter went to high school, I saw too that the parents with resources and with time, you know, who didn't have to work 2 jobs, who had cars, could make the efforts to go to the schools and choose the educational experience that they wanted for their children and choose the best schools. So that just sort of preserved the inequities. I don't know what the answer to this is, but it seems like Louisville has not managed to solve it, which is a shame. But my friend Shannon Putman, who is completing her doctorate in education at the University of Louisville, and who I met through virtual reality, was a teacher in the public school system in Louisville. And I went to visit her classroom there just before she left to complete her doctorate and to devote her full time to it. And she had a lab set up in the elementary school where she was working. And she had 50 Oculus Go headsets and a Vive Pro and an Oculus Rift. It was just amazing what she was doing there. And she had devised all sorts of lessons for the kids that sometimes involved them getting to use the VR headsets as a reward. And she would have them, she had them make a film about bullying, a 360 film about bullying from their perspective, and found that very eye-opening. But when talking about the body and about Maria Montessori and Montessori education, I want to remind you all that one of Montessori's innovations was to make sure that the furniture in the classroom fit the children's body sizes, that was specially designed for them. It wasn't adult furniture that they were supposed to try to grapple with and to work on, tables that were too tall, chairs that were too big, this sort of thing. So that was an innovation from Maria Montessori, the great educator from the early 20th century. And so what Shannon has done with the Grace James Academy of Excellence in Louisville, which is a program for middle school girls, it has an Afrocentric STEAM curriculum. And she has given a group of girls there headsets. I believe it's the Vive Focus. And she is having them redesign these headsets because the headsets don't work for these Black girls. They don't fit them properly for their hair. They might mess up their hair, and the hair is an important part of their identity. And so Shannon had this brilliant idea to have them redesign the headsets. Think about the learning that is involved in that, for design and engineering, the parts of the headset, how you put something like that together. And then also, you know, it has to surely lead to some interest in what is delivered there, right? And it's very empowering. It's a very empowering exercise. So I want to make the point that if we're going to use XR for education, we need to follow Maria Montessori in making sure that the equipment that we use is designed to fit children's bodies and to fit bodies more generally. I mean, for myself, even as an adult woman with a smallish head, I have problems sometimes with headsets that are too big for me, even if they're adjustable. They slide around on my head, or they, you know, will fall down and put all the weight on my nose, or something of the sort. You know, they're only designed for a small group of people. Which is a shame, but so I really applaud Shannon for the work she is doing. Keep an eye out for her. And so the notion of embodied cognition comes up quite a lot. And, you know, this is sort of a standard definition of it. The definition that cognition is embodied when aspects of the agent's body beyond the brain play a significant causal or physically constitutive role in cognitive processing. And I hope that some of what I'm going to say today is going to complicate that a bit, and push us into expanding our view of cognition and embodied cognition. I will go next to the work of Mina Johnson-Glenberg, who has really been influential for me in terms of my thinking about these kinds of issues. Mina was one of the panelists on the opening day of the iLearn conference, along with Chris Deedy, Mel SLATER, and Jeremy Bailenson. And there's a particular article of hers that I refer to that was really made me think a lot and has influenced my thinking on these kinds of issues. And it is called Immersive VR and Education, Embodied Design Principles that Include Gesture and Hand Controls. That was published in Frontiers in Robotics and AI in 2018. And when I went back to review that article for this presentation, I was surprised to see that she starts with a quote from Maria Montessori, and she opens with an insight from Montessori. I had completely forgotten that. It had been a while since I'd looked at the article. But one of the lessons she takes from Montessori is that learning depends on how our physical bodies interact with the environment. And Johnson-Glenberg also says that human cognition is deeply rooted in the body's interactions with the world and our systems of perception. And furthermore, that cognition includes sensory systems and emotions. And here I think you can already start to see that we're pushing against that kind of standard definition of embodied cognition. She also points out that for several decades now, the primary interface in educational technology has been the mouse and the keyboard. However, these are not highly embodied interface tools. So when we're working on a keyboard, we're really pretty much just moving our hands and our fingers. There's not a lot of bodily involvement with that. It is a low embodied experience. And to continue on with Johnson-Glenberg's work, she says that the affordances of VR that make it useful for for education are sensory motor engagement, immersion, and importantly, the congruency of gestures to the content to be learned. So this might be seen to apply more in a training context. If you are supposed to form a particular action in real life and you're trying to train someone to do that in VR, it's much more effective if the gesture matches what it is you were doing in real life. Say, rather than turn a steering wheel, if you were just pressing a button or moving a slider, that gesture is not congruent with the action. But if there is some sort of simulated wheel that you are actually turning, you're going to learn it a lot better. That's going to be a much more effective way of learning the information or learning the task. So Johnson-Glenberg draws on Susan Golden Meadows' work, and others do too in talking about these sorts of things. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to Susan Golden Meadow. But there's this concept of mirror neurons where a student can learn more when a teacher is gesturing themselves. So apparently what happens is that neurons are activated in the brain that apply to a certain type of movement when we watch someone else doing that movement. But apparently even any kind of gesture that the teacher will do will help students remember and learn something. I think this is really cool, very interesting. And Johnson-Glenberg also says that gestures may aid learners because learners use their own bodies to create an enriched representation of a problem grounded in physical metaphors. I'd also like to draw your attention to the work of Cassandra Eng, who is a brilliant PhD candidate at Carnegie Mellon University. She's working in cognitive neuroscience and the learning sciences. And some of her research involves children using VR in an exergame condition. So they're doing something that involves physical activity, sort of like exercise, but they also have to do a gaming activity that is connected to the learning that is taking place. And her research has shown that not only do children doing an exergame, so combining exercise and a gaming element to the learning activity, not only do they learn more, but their cognitive ability is improved and their executive function is improved. Really astonishing stuff. I encourage you to look out for Cassie's work. If you ever see her giving a talk or something that she's published, check it out and watch for her in the future. She's definitely a rising star. So I'll go back to Montessori again and my experience as the mother of a child in Montessori education. I really loved visiting the classroom and learning about what they were doing there, things like carrot chopping and button sewing. I just thought this was so novel and really amazing. And one thing I encountered on a visit to the classroom there was these Montessori square chains. They have, they also have cube chains. So there are these chains of beads that are segmented, and they allow you to lay the different segments alongside each other to physically form a square. So this is a way of teaching the abstract concept of squaring a number. And I was someone who, I never had problem with math in school. I did pretty well at it. I wish I had continued on further with it. But I knew what it was to square a number. I understood that intellectually. I'd seen the black and white graphs on the textbooks. So, I felt like I had a grasp of that. Well, when I saw this, it kind of hit me with the force of a revelation. I felt like I had a really different relationship to this knowledge and this understanding of what it meant to square a number. That's just a personal anecdote again, but it is something that has stuck with me for all these years, and I find it pretty meaningful. And I think it is related to the things I am talking about here. To go back to Johnson-Glenberg, she concludes that when learners perform actions with agency and can manipulate content during learning, they're able to learn even very abstract content better than those who learn in a more passive and low embodied manner. And for those of you who were at the opening panel, the opening day panel that she participated in, you'll know that she spoke of some recent work in which she compared a low embodied VR experience with a sort of a desktop VR experience in learning, and with a high embodied VR experience. And she was surprised, not that the high embodied VR experience was the one that resulted in most learning, but that the low embodied one was the lowest, even lower than the desktop condition. So that tells us, I think, or suggests at least, that VR is not effective in learning because it is VR, but because it allows us to engage in embodied experiences that enhance learning. Let's talk about math again. So I did leave math early and did not progress from trigonometry into calculus, and didn't really have a strong understanding of what calculus was. And I was so interested to see this CalcFlow app for VR, where you can take a calculus equation and you can plug in different variables, and you can even choose a different equation, and it will be represented on a 3D graph. Of course, you're seeing a 2D representation of it here, but you can take that graph, you can rotate it, you can scale it, you can hold it above your head, you can look down at it from above, you can do all these things with it. And so you have this kind of spatial or bodily relationship with it. And it really helped me to understand what calculus was, what it was for. I didn't even know that. And I'm not going to claim that I understand calculus now at all, but I do have a better sense of what it can do and why it is useful and why we have it. So this app then takes something that is abstract, a math equation, a calculus equation, and it makes it not concrete, I would say, but it makes it sensible. It makes it something that we can apprehend with our senses. Yes, so that's what I have to say about that. And I want to bring up the idea of proprioception, of sensing where our bodies are in space and how they move in space, including in ways in which it is possible for them to move. We kind of conceptualize that in thinking about what we're capable of doing. And there is some work by Brad Radvansky on navigation based on the sense of smell. And this was in mice. And so he used VR with these mice to determine that they have internal spatial maps that allow them to navigate by smell alone, even in the dark. So he took away the opportunity for them to navigate by vision, but they were able to navigate in this environment after being trained, even in the dark, just from the sense of smell. And so what I'm taking from this is this idea that we can have these spatial experience of virtual worlds based on what is presented to the senses. So, even of the real world. Next, I'm going to turn to the work of Nicola Liberati, who is an Italian philosopher living in China, I believe. And he's done some interesting work on the phenomenology of Pokemon Go. And so he talks about the ways in which spatial position can link different realities. So Pokemon Go has virtual objects or beings, these Pokemon characters, that are located in certain places in space. They have spatial location. And that provides the opportunity to link the world of the game, the world of the Pokemon game, to our actual world, or what Liberati calls the paramount reality. He also says there are these links in time, and he gives the example of a traffic jam caused by a lot of people going to find a particularly valuable Pokemon. And this has an effect on the real world, on people who are not even playing the game. So this world of the game is having an effect in the real world. And I also want to mention the work of Mark Pesce, who talks about the ways that augmented reality content tied to spatial locations can change the meanings of those locations. There's a great video that he did for the National Trust of Australia, I believe, in which he talks about this, about the ways that history is interpreted. And you can go to an historical location, let's just say, for example, the Battle of Gettysburg. You go to that battlefield, and the augmented reality information that is there, that is giving you the history about that, will help determine for you what the meaning of that space is. And so who determines what augmented content or what digital content is tied to that spatial location? Whoever does it, kind of gets to determine what the meaning of that space was. Continuing as we continue along this path of more and more digital information overlaid on top of our real worlds, that's an issue that we really need to think about. And I want to go back to one more point with regard to calc flow and the idea of these different realities that Liberati talks about, because so when you're looking at a calculus equation on a 3D graph, like the 2D image that we saw of it, when it is 2D and when it is seen on a rectangular screen, when it is presented as part of the tyranny of the rectangle, as Tony Parisi from Unity calls it, it is sort of bounded within that world. But according to Liberati, when something is then tied to the real world that has a real spatial location, then that is when it can have this sort of effect in the real world. Liberati's work is what he calls post-phenomenology. And in another article about the emotions, he says that subjects don't just use technologies, but that every experience of the subject is shaped through the use of technologies as if the subjects had a different body. Now, he starts out making this point by talking about eyeglasses and canes that blind people might use to get around, and that these have an effect on what our actions are. And these technologies are as if they are part of our bodies because they shape the actions that we can take. And he also uses the example of guns. Even in virtual worlds, when you put a gun in someone's hand, other people are turned into shootable beings. And that even the act of looking at other people is already framed by the presence of the gun. I know there have been studies done that say that immersive first-person shooters do not contribute to violent behavior. Honestly, I find that hard to believe, and I'd love to see more research done on that. And I think that Jessica Brillhart, in one of the opening panels for this conference, made a great point in talking about looking at this issue from the other side, which is why are we compelled to make so many games and VR experiences that involve shooting other people? You know, and why is the gun the model for the controllers that we use? With luck, hand tracking will change that a bit, and we'll have some different ways of interacting with the world. But yes, I thought that Nicola Liberati's point about this was a really interesting one. I want to next turn to this VR experience called Queer Skin's Arc, and an article that the creators published in the International Journal of New Media Technology and the Arts. And they make the point there that empathy is not just a mental activity of perspective taking. And I was one of the people who was very much influenced by Chris Milk's statement that VR is the ultimate empathy machine. That was something that really hooked me into this stuff and really set me down the path. But I think their point is that it's not just mental. They argue that movement and gesture are potential tools for generating empathy. And Queer Skin's Arc was designed in that way. It presents a gay couple and the mother of one of the men, and the mother is presented in 360-degree video, whereas the couple is presented through volumetric capture. And so the idea is that the user has a different relationship with them that is meant to produce empathy for the couple, which I think is really fascinating. And I'd love to learn more about that and see more studies on this kind of topic. So Liberati says that the technologies will become part of us and that our emotions will not be the same because they will embed new digital perceptual elements coming from the use of these technologies. And this is in an article called Emotions and Digital Technologies, the effects that digital technologies will have on our way of feeling emotions, according to a post-phenomenology and mediation theory. This was published in 2019. And he talks about taking bodily readings from a user and making emotions visible through taking these bodily readings and turning them into something like a necklace, he says. And then it becomes something that is externalized, and it turned into an object, digital object, that can be traded or gifted or sold or taken. And they can become fashion objects. I think this is a really fascinating, kind of scary idea, but you know, this comes from all the biometric capture that we are hearing about, and we heard a lot about from Kavya Perlman this afternoon in her talk. So these are kind of dystopic ideas. This piece of art came across my LinkedIn feed today, and so I thought I would share it because it has this image of, you know, sensory organs kind of connected to a circuit, and it's you know, not a very positive image, but I think it's very striking. The piece is called Lost Humanity, and it's by an artist called Miko Masiazik. But I'm a bit more optimistic, I think, than Masiazik is. And I want to hark way back, for those of you who can remember, to Donna Haraway and her Cyborg Manifesto from 1985, in which she talks about sort of the blurring boundaries between human and animal and human and machine. And she says in the end that she would rather be a cyborg than a goddess. Something worth revisiting. I think that's something I'm going to do soon, to dive more deeply back into Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto, and see how it relates to our current situation. Some scholars, artists and neuroscientists, this is a collaboration between artists and neuroscientists at University College London, which is my alma mater, have created this robotic third thumb that they have been able to show began to feel like part of the body of the participants who were wearing this in their study. So it changed how their minds conceived of the hand, which is just fascinating. So this idea that we have these mental representations of space and of our bodies, and that they can be altered through something like an extension. This is work that has also been done, similar work by Mel SLATER in his lab, with sort of limbs that we don't really have, but that we perceive as being parts of our bodies, or that are changed in link. And you know, some of his work is focused on using VR to transform the self, which I think is really interesting stuff. I mentioned Kavya Perlman's talk this afternoon, and her work is so important. She talked about biometrically inferred data. Some of this work comes out of the Virtual Human Interaction Lab that Jeremy Bailenson heads up. And she talks about, well, a 20-minute VR experience can generate 2 million unique recordings of body movements, and that body movements can be tracked 90 times per second in head-mounted displays. This was also mentioned by Emery Craig at the launch of the State of XR and Immersive Learning report yesterday. And I first heard Kavya talk about this last week at the WebXR Developers Summit. This is a still from the video of that talk, which you can still find. And I hope you will watch this or the recording of the talk that she did here for iLearn this afternoon. Really important work that she's doing, and we all need to support her because, you know, she's fighting for us. And she talks about all this biometrically inferred data that can be gathered from VR, from the head-mounted displays and other related devices that we are wearing, and ask about what can be gathered from this. What if we could be denied health insurance because of something that is gathered, some information that is gathered about us from this? Kavya mentioned today, what if we could determine whether a woman is pregnant from all this biometrically inferred data that is captured in VR? These things can have real consequences, and it's really important for us to pay attention to that. So I think I will conclude there and just return to some of the points that I have made along the way here. One of which is that hardware, XR hardware, should fit a range of bodies, including those of children, especially if we want to take advantage of the affordances of XR for enhancing education. Also, that as we design educational software and educational experiences for XR, we should incorporate bodily movement, a gaming element, and gestures that are congruent to what needs to be learned. These are things the research is showing us enhances learning. I think we also need strict policies about the collection and use of bodily data in XR, and we need to enforce those policies. Kavya was saying today that policy is not enough. And I know she is working with some of the large companies, going head to head with them, fighting them on these issues. And we need to remain vigilant, and we need to continue to fight for our rights around these issues. And my final point is that our ideas about the boundaries of our bodies and about what constitutes reality will probably change and expand as a result of our interactions with XR technologies. So I think I will leave it there. I thank you all very much for having me, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts about the topics I have raised here today. Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. Really admire her work. And she is, of course, an active member of iLearn as well. So this is where it's all happening. You know, I've learned so much at this conference already. And there, you know, I could have drawn on a number of other points that were made at various talks I've seen here that relate to the topics that I raised here. They seem to be important and very current ones in the work that a lot of people are doing around XR and education. Yeah, I'd love to hear some thoughts that other people have. Let's chat about this stuff.
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I had a two-part question if it's a Q&A session. Oh, Jeff, can I just share them or should I just wait for you?
I can't
Jeff,
hear
you're muted.
very well. I did hear someone speaking. You might have to repeat it for me, Jeff.
Just a moment. Okay, is this question coming from the Zoom?
It is.
Okay, she can't hear you, only I can. So I have to repeat your question to her.
Okay, Jeff, do you see the Zoom link? Do you see the, I've dropped it on the chat, my two-part question. Can you see them, Jeff?
Yes, I see that. So I'll read that out. Karen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. How can we help with biometric data projection? This is a human right to privacy that needs to be protected. This is from Nellie Matthey. Ely Kim asks, to what extent do physical headsets impact the delivery of responsive educational VR content? How can software VR companies work with hardware VR companies to make VR content more accessible?
Okay. Well, with response to the first part of that, I'd say support the XR Safety Initiative and the work that Kavya Perlman is doing there and the Cyber XR Coalition. You know, it is important, and they seem to be really making some progress there, working with the Australian government, for example. And so I think getting involved with XRSI is a way that we can continue to fight for our rights and our privacy there. And with regard to the content, oh, thank you. Caroline Dennis has just shared in the chat here in iLearn the framework, the XRSI framework from Kavya Perlman. Thank you very much, Caroline. And I do see that you have your hand up. Well, I think that we find, for example, the most prevalent head-mounted display right now is the Oculus Quest 2. And they are, it's owned by Facebook. And so, they're the ones who are collecting a lot of this data. And I know that some of the companies do try to encourage the creation of content. Others don't. There's a problem there with, in terms of content that is available, you have a lot of independents producing content and really struggling to get it out there. And of course, we saw the big battle between Epic Games and Apple about the cut that Apple was taking for their games. So there are a lot of a lot of things to take into account here. Obviously the headset makers need content in order to sell their headsets, in order for people to want to buy them. But we need to make sure that the people who are making the content are appropriately rewarded for their work. And that isn't always the case. Some companies, Epic is one, do make a lot of money, but the smaller, more independent ones don't. And the fact that there are a lot of independent makers out there means that it's much more difficult to negotiate those relationships. The creators have a lot less power when it comes to the companies like Oculus that have these sort of gated, these walled gardens through which the content has to go and it has to be approved for. And of course, with independence, there's a less of an opportunity to regulate that. And I don't think that the companies like Oculus would do or are doing a very good job of that. So yeah, and I see that Caroline, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, and Karen, and you already know that I'm so inspired by the work that you and others in the XR space are doing. But I guess my question is just from your vantage point, because you've been in this for a while in the education space. How do you combat the attitudes around assumptions around what XR is and isn't, right? And there's a lot of that dystopian stuff that I feel like it's so hard sometimes because people check out. They kind of just dismiss it. And how do you manage that? I mean, a lot of it is just promoting the great work that's happening, these kinds of meetups. But I'm just curious about what strategies you use when you're talking with someone who, almost clearly has already decided, oh, it's just crazy, right? It's all just terrible and it's not great. So it seems like there's so much that all of us need to do, just even individually as we're out in our communities interacting with people. So I was just curious what you think is a pathway for that for individuals and for communities.
Yeah, well, so my professional background is in higher education, and when I made a complete life change and dove headfirst into XR, I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where I am now, and I started working eventually with very young children and with youth ages 7 to 23, although not necessarily college students. And one of the things that I was really keen to do was to encourage them to be creators of experiences and not just consumers of it. So I think that having people approach XR from that way, from being creators, is important. And I also had a partnership with Pittsburgh Community Television for events that we called Community XR. And we had these rotating events that would go to different locations around the city where people could come in and try XR for free. And this was a digital literacy project, as I saw it. We also had at least one AR device and some mobile AR experiences. We had 360 cameras there. And so this is a way of trying to introduce people to this technology. And I think it makes a huge difference once people put on that headset, they start to see the possibilities. You just see the imagination open up. I think I actually have saved here a picture that I can pull up very quickly. Yes, okay, so this picture that's up there on the screen now is sort of a collage from our community XR events. And you see, I love this picture in the middle and the top of this elderly woman in an Oculus Go headset. It's just so wonderful. And then there are little kids there too, doing various things. We wouldn't allow extremely young kids into headsets, but just a variety of people. But of course, as Jenna says, yes, I can't wait to have these events like this again too. Our most recent event was scheduled for March 14th, 2020. And of course we had to cancel that. And my work with children has not resumed either. I never sort of made that turn to doing it online. But I would love to get back to it. So those are some ways I approach it, trying to come at it from a community perspective. The students that I worked with, the ages 7 to 23, those were with community organizations that may have been like out of school arts organizations and others that were already working with these children and youth. So that's how I have tried to approach it, is from a very grassroots level, giving people the opportunity to try out XR and also encouraging them to become creators. And I want to comment too that I saw, it was a while back in the chat, but Eileen posted that the John Bailenson study on stimulus sampling and identifying users based on body movement is publicly available as a data set for others to analyze. That's great. That's fantastic that they've made this available to the public. Excellent.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
That's great. Let's see. I have a question. I work in medical simulation, and we have the mannequins and the fake operating rooms, and we're starting to use VR as well. And it's, well, this isn't really a question. It's more of a shaggy dog, and you can't simulate haptics well at all, in VR, because the tip of your finger can feel textures, finer than a human hair. But the embodiment is still there. The moving through virtual space is still there. So everything you talked about today would really be of interest in a medical training simulation conference. So I think I just invited you.
Oh, okay. Well, that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff. Yeah, and we had at XR Women a couple of speakers who work in medical simulation. Molly Schleicher from Oxford Medical Simulation, who happens to be based in Pittsburgh. Molly is not Oxford Medical Simulation. And then also Karen Breitkreutz, who had worked with Susie Cardong-Edgren on a VR experience to teach catheterization to nurses. So those are two people who have done some interesting work in that area, in case you're looking for some speakers there.
Great, thank you. Let's talk about it.
Okay.
I have your email. All right. So in about 3 minutes, let's see, let me get up into the blue area. Whoops. Karen, thank you for a great talk. Sanjit is going to give his talk in the Zoom. By the way, you had 14 people avidly following you there. And everyone is here, welcome to hang around and chat with Karen or each other and so forth. So a big thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Great.
You've been a great audience.
All right, Zoomers, I'm going to keep the share going until Sanjit is actually ready to start.
Okay.
Oh, goodness.